Hello there, how are you tonight? I want you to imagine something that feels familiar, and yet completely different. The idea of meeting someone, getting to know them, and slowly choosing to build a life together. It sounds simple, almost natural, but in medieval times, things didn't quite work that way, because love wasn't always the beginning of a relationship. Sometimes it wasn't even part of it at all. You wouldn't choose freely, you wouldn't take your time, and in many cases, you wouldn't even have a say. Families decided, circumstances decided, and life moved forward whether you were ready or not. And yet, within all of this, people still felt something: curiosity, nervousness, and sometimes a quiet hope. So tonight, we step gently into a world where relationships were less about romance and more about responsibility. But before we begin, take a moment to like the video, subscribe if you enjoy these calm journeys, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. It's always comforting to see how far these quiet stories travel. Now, let's slowly step into the medieval world and explore what dating was really like. The air is colder here, not just in temperature, but in feeling. You find yourself standing on a narrow dirt path, somewhere between a small village and a stretch of open farmland. The sky is dim, painted in soft grays and fading gold, as if the day itself is growing tired. There are no glowing screens, no messages waiting, no chance encounters arranged by coincidence or technology, just silence, broken only by the distant sound of wind brushing against wooden fences. In this world, there is no concept of dating as you know it, no casual conversations over coffee, no long walks to discover shared interests, no slow unfolding of two people choosing each other. Instead, life moves with a quiet certainty. From a young age, your future is not something you explore, it is something that quietly approaches you. Step by step, you might not even notice it at first. As a child, your days are simple. You wake with the sun, help where you are needed, and listen carefully to the rhythms of life around you. Conversations about marriage happen in low voices, usually not meant for your ears, but they are always there, like a distant echo. There is no moment where someone asks, "Who do you like?" Instead, the question is never spoken, because the answer has likely already been decided. In medieval society, relationships are rarely about two individuals finding each other. They are threads woven into something much larger: family ties, land agreements, survival itself. You don't search for love. Love, if it comes at all, arrives later, sometimes much later, and sometimes not at all. As you walk further along the path, you begin to notice the village more clearly. Small homes made of wood and stone, smoke rising slowly from chimneys. A few figures moving in the distance, each focused on their tasks. Everyone seems to belong somewhere, everyone has a place, and within that place, expectations. You feel it without anyone needing to explain it, a quiet understanding that your life will follow a certain direction, not chosen, but accepted. There is a strange calm in this, a kind of stillness that settles in when choices are limited, but beneath that calm, something else exists, a question. Unspoken: what would it feel like to choose, to meet someone by chance, to speak freely, to decide, slowly, carefully, whether your life might fit with theirs? That question lingers like a soft shadow, and yet, here, it is not a question you are meant to ask. Time moves differently in this world. There is no urgency to find someone because the finding is not yours to do. Instead, life unfolds in stages: childhood, duty, marriage, family, each step waiting quietly for its turn. As the light begins to fade, you notice a young figure standing near a well. They are still, watching the ground, as if lost in thought for a brief moment. You wonder what they are thinking. Do they feel curious about the future? Do they wonder who they will be joined with? And when, or have they already learned? Not to wonder at all, you'll never know, because in this world, those thoughts are often kept hidden. Tucked away beneath routine and expectation, the evening settles in, the village grows quieter, and as you stand there, observing this distant time, one thing becomes clear: dating, as you understand it, doesn't exist here. There are no beginnings shaped by choice, no relationships built from shared discovery, only lives that slowly come together, guided by forces far beyond personal desire. And yet, somewhere within that structure, within those quiet, predetermined paths, something human still remains, a feeling, faint but persistent, the possibility that even in a world without choice, people might still find moments, however small, that feel like their own. And as the darkness gently settles around you, you begin to sense, this is only the beginning of the story. The morning arrives quietly, not with urgency, not with excitement, but with a slow, steady rhythm that feels almost inevitable. A pale light stretches across the village, touching rooftops, slipping through small windows, and settling gently onto the earth. It reveals nothing new, only what has always been there, routine. You begin to notice how life here is shaped not by personal desire, but by necessity. Every movement has purpose, every action supports survival, and within this quiet structure, relationships begin to take form, not through attraction, not through long conversations or shared laughter, but through something far more practical: responsibility. In medieval times, love is not the foundation of a relationship, it is, at best, a possibility, a distant outcome that may or may not arrive, because when two people are brought together, it is rarely because they have chosen each other, it is because their union serves a purpose. You walk slowly through the village as the day unfolds. A man repairs a wooden cart, his movement steady and practiced. Nearby, a woman gathers water, her expression calm but distant. They live together, they share a life, but as you watch them, something feels restrained. There is no visible tension, but there is also no visible warmth, just a quiet cooperation, a shared understanding that their lives are connected, not by feeling, but by obligation. And yet, beneath that surface, something more complex exists, because people are still human, they still feel, even when those feelings are not the reason for their union. Love, in this world, is unpredictable. It does not guide decisions, it follows them. Sometimes, over time, two people grow closer, not through grand gestures, but through small, repeated moments, passing each other tools, sharing meals in silence, sitting near the fire at the end of a long day. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifts, not passion, not intensity, but familiarity, comfort, a kind of quiet acceptance that can, in some cases, become something resembling love. But this is never guaranteed. For many, that feeling never fully forms. Instead, relationships remain steady, functional, distant. You begin to sense that love, as it is understood in your world, would feel almost unfamiliar here, too uncertain, too risky, because relying on love means relying on something that cannot be controlled. And in medieval life, control matters, stability matters, survival matters. You pause near a small home, its wooden door slightly open. Inside, you can see a couple seated at a simple table. They do not speak. The silence is not uncomfortable, but it is not warm either. It simply exists, a shared space, without shared emotion, and yet something about it feels peaceful, perhaps because expectations are different. There is no pressure to be deeply understood, no expectation of constant connection, just the understanding that this is how life is, and life continues, but occasionally something breaks through, a glance held a moment longer than necessary, a hand brushing another, not by accident, but not entirely on purpose, a quiet moment where responsibility fades, and something softer takes its place. These moments are rare, and because they are rare, they are powerful, they linger, unspoken, but deeply felt. As the day begins to fade once more, you notice a young couple walking along the edge of the village. They are not touching. They are not speaking. But they are walking side by side, in silence, and somehow that silence feels different, less distant, more aware, as if both of them are quietly wondering the same thing. Could something more exist here, or is this all there will ever be? The sky dims, and shadows stretch across the land. The question remains unanswered, because in this world, love is not a promise, it is a possibility, one that exists somewhere beyond duty, beyond expectation, waiting quietly to be discovered, or perhaps never discovered at all. The day never truly belongs to you here, it begins before you are ready, and it moves forward without asking what you want. By now, you've started to feel it more clearly, that quiet, invisible structure guiding everything, including something as deeply personal as who you will spend your life with. In medieval times, relationships are not simply formed between two people, they are arranged, considered, and often decided by families. You walk slowly through the village once more, but this time, something feels different. Conversations seem heavier. Glances carry meaning. There are quiet discussions happening behind closed doors. And you begin to understand that these moments are not random. They are decisions being made, not by those who will live the life, but by those who believe they understand what is best. A father stands near the entrance of his home, speaking in low tones with another man. Their expressions are serious, measured. This is not casual conversation, this is negotiation, not of feelings, but of futures. Marriage, in this world, is rarely about emotional connection. It is about alignment of families, of resources, of stability. Who you marry can determine everything: where you live, how you survive, what your children inherit, and so, the decision is treated with care. But not in the way you might expect. There is little discussion of affection. Instead, there are questions of usefulness. Is the family reliable? Do they have land? Can they offer security? You begin to realize that love, if it exists at all, is secondary, a distant consideration. Something that may come later, but is never required at the beginning. Inside a nearby home, a young girl sits quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She listens as her parents speak softly across the room. They do not include her in the conversation. But she knows, she can feel it, her future is being shaped in this moment, without her voice, without her choice, and yet she remains still, because this is what is expected. There is no dramatic resistance, no open defiance, just a quiet acceptance that this is how life unfolds. But acceptance does not mean absence of feeling. Beneath the calm exterior, there is uncertainty, questions that cannot be asked. What will the person be like? Will they be kind? Will they be distant? Or will they simply exist as another part of a life already decided? You step outside again, the air carrying a faint chill. The weight of these unseen decisions lingers around you. It is not loud, but it is constant. A young man walks past you, his expression unreadable. Perhaps he has already been told. Perhaps he knows that soon he will meet someone, not as a stranger to discover, but as a future already chosen. There is no excitement in his step, only thought, deep, quiet thought, because once the decision is made, it is rarely questioned. Family authority holds a quiet power here, not forceful, but firm. It is built on generations of belief that elders know what is best. That experience outweighs desire. That stability is more important than emotion, and so, even when doubt exists, it is often kept inside. Unspoken, carried quietly. As the afternoon fades into evening, you notice something subtle, despite everything. Despite the lack of choice. Despite the absence of romance at the beginning, there is still a kind of trust, not between individuals, but between generations, a belief that this system, though imperfect, will lead to a life that works, a life that continues, and perhaps that is enough. But as you stand there, watching the village settle once more into the softness of night, you can't help but wonder, what happens to the feelings that don't fit into these decisions, the curiosity, the hesitation, the quiet hope for something more? Where do they go when there is no space for them? The sky darkens slowly, and somewhere, inside one of those small homes, a decision has just been made, a future quietly sealed, before it has even begun. There is something about youth in this world that feels shorter, not in years, but in freedom. It doesn't stretch gently into discovery, or wander through endless possibilities. Instead, it moves quietly, steadily, toward something already waiting. You begin to notice it in the smallest details, the way children are spoken about, not just as they are, but as they will soon become. A young girl is no longer simply a child, she is a future bride. A young boy is not just growing, he is a future husband. These ideas settle early, so early, in fact, that by the time they are understood, they already feel normal. You walk along a narrow path where a few children are gathered. Their laughter soft and brief. For a moment, everything feels light, untouched by expectation, but then an older voice calls from a distance. The laughter fades, not abruptly, but gently, as if even joy knows its place here, because in medieval times, arrangements for marriage often begin long before adulthood, sometimes in early teenage years, and sometimes even earlier. In quiet discussions between families, there is no dramatic announcement, no single moment where everything changes. Instead, it unfolds slowly, a conversation here, a consideration there, until one day it is simply known. You pause near a small gathering of adults. Their voices are calm, measured. They speak not of emotion, but of timing, when the time is right, when they are ready. But readiness here does not mean emotional understanding, it means something else: practical readiness, physical maturity, capability, the ability to step into a role, whether or not the heart is prepared. And so, youth becomes something fleeting, not taken away, but quietly shortened. A young girl stands nearby, holding a small bundle of fabric. Her expression is neutral, but her eyes drift, just slightly, as if trying to grasp something just out of reach. Does she understand what is being planned, or does she only feel that something is changing? It is difficult to tell, because in this world, questions are not always asked aloud. A young boy passes by, carrying tools that seem almost too heavy for him. He moves carefully, deliberately. There is a quiet seriousness in his steps, as if he already knows that soon he will not be seen as a child anymore, but as someone expected to take on responsibility, to provide, to lead, to step into a life that has been quietly forming around him. There is no transition marked by celebration, no moment of pause, just a gradual shift from one expectation to the next. As the day continues, you begin to feel a subtle tension beneath the calm surface, not fear, not resistance, but something softer, a quiet uncertainty, because when life moves this quickly, when decisions are made this early, there is little space to understand what it all means. And yet, life does not wait. In a small home at the edge of the village, preparations are already beginning. Simple items are being gathered. Fabric folded. Small belongings set aside, not with urgency, but with quiet intention, the kind that suggests something inevitable, a future approaching. Step by step, you stand in the doorway, watching as a mother carefully arranges these things. Her movements are gentle, practiced. There is no sadness in her expression, but there is something else, a kind of acceptance, perhaps even familiarity, because she has lived this moment before, not as the one preparing, but as the one being prepared, and now, the cycle continues. As evening falls, the village grows still once more. The sky softens into deep shades of blue and gray, and the world feels quieter. Almost suspended, but beneath that stillness, everything is moving forward, slowly, steadily, without pause. You begin to understand that in this world, childhood does not end suddenly, it fades, replaced not by choice, but by expectation, and somewhere within that quiet transition, a life is already beginning to take shape, long before it is truly understood. There is a quiet moment, just before two lives intersect, where everything feels suspended, not yet begun, but no longer distant. You can sense it now, after days, perhaps weeks, of quiet arrangements and unspoken decisions. The moment has finally arrived. They will meet, not as strangers by chance, but as two people already tied together by something larger than themselves. You walk toward a small open space near the center of the village. It is not grand. There are no decorations, no signs of celebration, just a stillness, a kind of quiet preparation. A few figures stand nearby, family members, watching, waiting. Their presence is calm, but deliberate. This is not a private meeting. It is observed, measured, because this first encounter is not about discovery, it is about confirmation. A young woman approaches slowly, her steps careful, her gaze lowered. Her clothing is simple, but arranged with care. There is a softness to her presence, but also restraint. She has been told what this moment means. She understands, at least in part, what is expected. From the other side, a young man steps forward. His posture is straight, his movements controlled. There is a quiet tension in the way he holds himself, as if he is trying to remain steady within something unfamiliar. They stop a short distance apart. There is no immediate greeting, no easy conversation. Just silence, a silence filled not with comfort, but with awareness. This is the person, the one they have heard about, but never truly known, the one they may soon share a life with. You notice the way they glance at each other, briefly, carefully, almost as if unsure how long is acceptable. There is curiosity, but it is restrained. Because this is not a moment for open expression, it is a moment for quiet observation. Do they seem kind? Do they appear capable? Do they fit into the life already imagined for them? These are the unspoken questions. Not do I feel something, but will this work? A family member steps slightly closer, offering a few gentle words to guide the interaction. The tone is calm, encouraging, but controlled. The conversation begins. It is simple, careful. Questions are asked, but they are not deeply personal. There is no exploration of dreams or hidden thoughts. Only what is necessary. Where have you worked? What can you do? What do you understand of life ahead? The answers come quietly, measured, each word chosen with care. As if too much honesty might disrupt the delicate balance of this moment, and yet, beneath it all, something else exists, a subtle awareness. Two individuals standing face to face, realizing that this is the beginning of something they did not choose, but must now learn to accept. The air feels still around them, even the distant sounds of the village seem to soften, as if giving space to this quiet exchange. For a brief moment, their eyes meet again, this time, just a little longer, and in that glance, something flickers, not love, not certainty, but recognition, the understanding that whatever comes next, they will face it together. Whether they wish to or not, the meeting does not last long. There is no need for it to, because the decision has already been made. This moment is not about deciding. It is about acknowledging, as they step back, the distance between them returns. Family members shift slightly, their presence once again more visible. There are small nods, subtle signs of approval. Everything is proceeding. As expected, the young woman lowers her gaze once more. The young man exhales. Almost imperceptibly, and just like that. The moment passes, but something has changed. Before, they were part of a plan. Now, they have seen each other, heard each other, felt the quiet weight of what lies ahead. As you step away from the scene, the feeling lingers, that delicate, uncertain space between strangers, who are no longer entirely strangers, and as the light begins to fade once more, you begin to wonder, what happens after this, when the meeting is over, when the silence returns, what thoughts remain, because sometimes, the first meeting is not about connection, but about realizing there is no turning back. After the first meeting, something subtle begins to shift, not outwardly, not in ways that anyone would immediately notice, but internally, quietly. Everything starts to settle into place, because now, it is no longer an idea, it is real. The faces have been seen, the voices have been heard, and the future, once distant and abstract, now feels closer, more defined. You walk once again through the village, but this time, there is a different kind of awareness in the air. It is not the uncertainty of before, but something more structured, a quiet understanding of what comes next, because in medieval times, once a match is agreed upon, expectations begin almost immediately. Not romantic expectations, not dreams of connection or companionship, but roles, clear, defined, and rarely questioned. The young woman you saw earlier is now inside her home. The atmosphere is calm, but purposeful. She sits beside an older woman, perhaps her mother, or someone who has lived through this path before. There is no dramatic instruction, no long speech, just small, steady guidance, how to manage a household, how to prepare meals, how to move through daily life with quiet efficiency. These lessons are not new, but now they carry weight, because soon they will no longer be practice, they will be her reality. Across the village, the young man moves through a similar transition. His tasks are familiar, but his responsibility feels heavier now. Each action seems to carry meaning, as if he is no longer simply learning, but proving that he can provide, that he can sustain a life not just for himself, but for someone else. There is little room for hesitation. Expectation does not wait for comfort. It arrives. And it remains. You begin to notice that these expectations are not spoken loudly. They do not need to be. They exist in the way people look at them, in the subtle shift in tone when they are addressed, in the quiet assumption that they will step into these roles without question, and most of the time they do, not because they are certain, but because there is no clear alternative. As the day continues, you observe a small but telling moment. The young woman carefully arranges simple items inside her home. Her movements are precise, almost practiced, but there is a pause, a brief stillness. Her hands rest lightly against the surface. And for a moment, she does nothing. Just breathes, as if trying to understand what all of this truly means, what it will feel like to leave this space, to enter another, to become someone new. In a life already waiting for her, across the village, the young man sits near a wooden structure, tools laid out beside him. He stares ahead, not unfocused, but thoughtful. There is no visible fear, but there is awareness, a recognition that his life is about to change in a way that cannot be undone, and yet neither of them speaks these thoughts aloud, because this stage is not about questioning, It is about preparing, quietly, steadily, without disruption. The village itself seems to support this transition. Everything continues as it always has. The routines remain unchanged. The rhythms of daily life move forward. Unaffected, but beneath that consistency, two lives are slowly shifting, becoming something else. As evening approaches, a soft golden light settles over the land. It casts long shadows, stretching gently across the ground, as if time itself is slowing down. You notice the two of them again, not together, but existing within the same space. Now connected by something unseen, they do not speak, they do not approach, but there is an awareness, a quiet recognition that the other exists, that soon distance will no longer separate them, and in that awareness, something begins to form, not emotion, not yet, but anticipation, a quiet, steady sense that something is coming, and that it will change everything. The sky begins to darken, the day ends as it always does, but for them, it does not feel the same, because once expectations take hold, they do not fade, they guide, they shape, and they quietly lead each step toward a life that is no longer uncertain, but no longer entirely their own. There is something else shaping these lives, something even quieter than expectation, but just as powerful. You begin to notice it not in what people say, but in where they stand, how they move, and who they stand beside, because in medieval times, love does not move freely between people, it follows boundaries, invisible, but firmly held. You walk through the village once more, but now your attention shifts. The details you once overlooked begin to stand out. Clothing, for example, some wear rough, simple fabrics, worn by work, softened by time. Others, though rare in this small place, carry garments that are cleaner, more structured, carefully maintained. It is not just about appearance. It is about place, because in this world, social class is not something you change, it is something you are born into, and something you remain within. And when it comes to relationships, this matters more than anything else. You begin to understand that marriage is not only about two families aligning, but about two positions in society staying intact. A farmer's child will marry another within the same life. A craftsman's family will look towards similar skill and stability, and among the noble, the expectations grow even stricter, not out of cruelty, but out of preservation, because stepping outside these boundaries risks more than disapproval, it risks instability. A life that no longer fits into the structure everyone depends on. You pause as a small group gathers near the center of the village. Their conversation is quiet, but you can sense its direction. They are speaking about a potential match, not questioning if the individuals would get along, but if their lives would align, if their roles would match, if their worlds are close enough to merge without disruption. And suddenly, it becomes clear, even if two people were to feel something unexpected, something genuine, it would not be enough, not here. Because feeling does not outweigh structure, a young woman passes by, her posture composed, her clothing slightly finer than most around her. She does not look toward the others. But there is a distance in the way people observe her, respect, perhaps, or separation. Nearby, a young man continues his work, his hands marked by labor. For a brief moment, their paths cross, not physically, but within the same space, and in that moment, there is a quiet awareness, a glance. Brief and uncertain, gone almost as soon as it appears. Nothing more happens, nothing can happen, because even the smallest connection must remain within its place. You begin to feel the weight of these unseen lines. They are not spoken aloud, no one announces them, and yet everyone understands them, from childhood, from observation, from the quiet reinforcement of daily life. Stay within your world, build within your place, do not reach beyond what is expected, because reaching can lead to falling, and falling is something few can afford. As the day moves forward, you notice how naturally people accept these boundaries. There is little visible frustration, no open defiance. Just a steady rhythm of life lived within its limits, and perhaps that is what makes it feel so absolute. It is not enforced with force, it is maintained through belief, through generations of understanding that this is how things are meant to be. Still, beneath that acceptance, there are moments, small ones, almost invisible, a longer glance than usual, a pause where none is needed, a thought that lingers just slightly longer than it should. These moments do not change anything, but they exist, and in their quiet way, they reveal something deeply human, that even within structure, within limitation, within lives shaped by expectation, there is still a part of the heart that wonders. What if, as evening approaches, the village settles once more? The same paths, the same homes, the same quiet routines, nothing has changed, and yet you see it differently now, not just as a place where lives unfold, but as a place where possibilities are quietly shaped, and quietly limited. The sky softens into dusk, and somewhere, within these unseen boundaries, a feeling fades before it can even begin, not because it wasn't real, but because it was never meant to exist here. The world you've been walking through is only part of the story, because beyond this quiet village, beyond the worn paths and modest homes, there exists another life entirely, not separate in distance alone, but in experience, in feeling, in what relationships are allowed to become. You begin to sense it as the scene slowly shifts. The simple rhythm of village life fades into the background, replaced by something more structured, more refined. Stone replaces wood, order replaces simplicity, and within these walls, expectations take on a different form, because in medieval times, love and relationships are not just shaped by family, but by status, and the difference between a peasant's life and a noble's life is not just visible, it is deeply felt. You step into a larger space now, a courtyard surrounded by tall stone walls. The air feels quieter here, but not in the same way as the village. It is controlled, measured, every movement seems observed. Even when no one is watching, a young noblewoman walks slowly along the edge of the courtyard. Her clothing is elegant, carefully arranged. Her posture is precise, her expression calm. Almost unreadable. There is no visible struggle, but there is also no visible freedom, because while her life may appear more comfortable, it is no less restricted. In fact, in many ways, it is more so. In the village, relationships are guided by survival. Here, they are guided by power. A noble marriage is not simply about stability, it is about alliance, about strengthening positions, about ensuring that influence continues. Without interruption, you notice a group of figures gathered nearby. Their conversation is quiet, deliberate. Names are spoken. Families mentioned. Not with warmth, but with calculation. Who would benefit from this union? What would it secure? What might be gained? Love is not part of the discussion. It does not need to be, because here, the stakes are higher. A wrong match is not just inconvenient, it can shift power, disrupt balance, change the course of entire families, and so, choice becomes even more distant. The young noblewoman pauses near a stone column, her gaze drifting beyond the courtyard walls. For a moment, something soft appears in her expression, a flicker of thought, of wondering, what lies beyond this life, but the moment passes quickly, because here, even thoughts must remain contained. Meanwhile, far beyond these walls, the village continues. A young peasant couple works side by side in a field. Their movements are steady, familiar. There is no elegance here. No structured control, just effort, shared, constant. Their relationship is not shaped by power, but by necessity. They rely on each other. not because they were carefully matched for influence, but because survival demands cooperation, and in that cooperation, something different can grow, not always love, but something close to it, a bond formed through shared struggle, through long days and quiet evenings, something unspoken, but real. You begin to understand that while peasants have less control over their lives, they sometimes have more space for something genuine to form. Not intentionally, but naturally, and yet both worlds carry their own weight. The noble lives within walls of expectation and duty, the peasant lives within cycles of labor and survival. Neither is free, just different. As the sun begins to lower, the contrast becomes even more striking. Golden light touches both worlds, but in different ways. In the courtyard, it reflects off stone, creating a quiet stillness. In the fields, it settles into the earth, warm and grounding. Two lives, two paths, both leading toward the same destination, marriage, commitment, a shared life, but the journey to reach that point feels entirely different. You stand between these worlds now, feeling the quiet tension that separates them, and you begin to wonder, if love exists in either of them, does it feel the same, or is it shaped just like everything else here? By where you stand, the light fades, the walls grow darker, the fields grow still, and somewhere between comfort and hardship, between power and survival, relationships continue to form, not as they are chosen, but as they are allowed. In a world without modern dating, even courtship becomes something structured, not spontaneous, not casual, but shaped carefully. Like everything else in medieval life, you begin to notice that after arrangements are made, after families agree, after the first meeting passes, there is still a space in between, a quiet period, not yet marriage, but no longer strangers. This is where courtship exists, but it is not what you might expect. There are no private escapes into the countryside, no long conversations under open skies, no freedom to simply get to know someone without eyes watching. Instead, every interaction is measured, every moment observed. You walk through the village and notice small gatherings forming. Not loud or festive, but controlled. A young couple sits near a modest wooden structure, their families nearby but not interfering directly. There is space between them, not physical distance alone, but emotional caution, because even here, where a match has already been decided, feelings are still not assumed, they must be tested. Slowly, carefully, a simple conversation begins. Questions about daily life, work, family. Nothing too personal, nothing too revealing, and yet, within these small exchanges, something subtle begins to form. Understanding, not romance, not passion, but awareness, the realization that this is a person who will soon become part of one's daily existence. You notice how silence plays a role here. It is not uncomfortable, it is expected. Long pauses are not awkward interruptions, but natural spaces where thought can exist. A young woman adjusts her hands in her lap, listening more than speaking. A young man answers carefully, as if weighing each word before allowing it to leave his lips. There is no rush, because time here does not move like it does in modern expectations of love. There is no urgency to decide feelings. Feelings are not the focus. Function is compatibility in daily life, ability to share responsibility, capacity to endure routine, and yet, beneath all of this, something human quietly persists, a glance that lingers a moment longer than necessary, a faint smile that appears before it is controlled. A brief moment where both seem to forget that they are being observed. It is in these small cracks that courtship becomes something more than structure, but it never fully escapes it. Nearby, family members watch with calm attention, not interfering, but always present. Their role is not to interrupt, but to ensure that nothing goes beyond what is appropriate, because courtship, in this world, is not private discovery, it is guided familiarity, a path walked. Not alone, but within boundaries. As the afternoon light shifts, you notice another pair sitting slightly apart from the rest. Their conversation is slower now, more relaxed. The initial tension has softened, not into love, but into something quieter, comfort, the sense that speaking to this person is no longer unfamiliar, and that alone is significant, because in medieval times, familiarity is the closest thing to emotional safety. There is no guarantee of affection, no promise of deep connection, only the possibility that, over time, two lives might settle into each other. Like well-worn paths, as the sun begins to lower, the gathering slowly disperses. Families rise, conversations end, and the couple separates once again, not dramatically, not emotionally, but simply. As part of the process, you watch them walk away in opposite directions, each returning to their respective spaces, and yet something has changed. They are no longer untouched by each other's presence. Even if nothing has been spoken aloud, even if nothing has been promised, courtship has done its quiet work. It has introduced familiarity into what was once uncertainty, and that is enough. For now, as evening settles over the village, you begin to understand something subtle. In this world, relationships are not built in moments of passion, they are built in repetition, in presence, in time, slowly, carefully, quietly, and as darkness approaches once more, you realize this is only one step in a process that continues long after the first meeting ends, a process where emotion is not denied, but delayed. There are moments in medieval life, so small, so quiet, that they would almost disappear completely if you weren't paying attention, and yet these are often the moments that linger the longest, because in a world where relationships are shaped by duty, by family, by expectation, connection does not arrive loudly, it arrives softly, in fragments. You find yourself once again in the village, where the day continues its slow rhythm. People move through familiar paths. Work is being done. Water is carried. Wood is gathered. Everything feels ordinary, unchanged, but within this ordinariness, something subtle unfolds. A young couple, now in the courtship stage, passes each other near a narrow path between homes. There is no planned meeting, no arranged conversation, just a brief crossing, and yet something happens, a glance, not long enough to be noticed by others, but long enough to be remembered by them. There is no smile exchanged, no word spoken, only awareness, the recognition that the other is there, and that they are becoming part of each other's world. They continue walking, nothing outwardly changes, but internally something shifts ever so slightly. These are the kinds of moments that define this stage of life, not declarations, not decisions, but tiny acknowledgements of presence. Elsewhere in the village, another small moment unfolds. A young man offers a simple tool back to a young woman after she drops it during work. The exchange is practical, necessary, but in the pause between giving and receiving, there is something else, a fraction of stillness, a shared breath of awareness. It lasts only seconds, and then it is gone, but it remains, not in action, but in memory. You begin to realize that in this world, connection is not built through grand emotional expression, it is built through repetition of these quiet fragments, a shared space, a passing glance, a moment of silence that does not feel empty, and over time, these fragments begin to accumulate, not into love immediately, but into familiarity, and familiarity, here, is powerful, because it means the other person is no longer unknown, no longer distant. They become part of your mental landscape, the presence you recognize without effort. You walk further through the village as the light shifts gently into late afternoon. The sun is lower now, softer, casting long shadows that stretch across the ground like slow-moving thoughts. Near a small wooden fence, the same couple sits again, this time not speaking at first. There is comfort in the silence now, less hesitation, more ease. They are still not close in the way modern love stories might expect. But they are no longer strangers. That change, though quiet, is significant. A family member watches from a distance, then slowly turns away. There is no need to interrupt this moment. It is proceeding as intended. Naturally, gradually, as the day continues, you notice how these small connections exist everywhere once you begin to look for them. A shared laugh that fades quickly, a brief moment of understanding during work, a pause where both individuals choose not to speak. And somehow, that silence feels shared. None of these moments define a relationship on their own, but together, they begin to shape something beneath the surface, something unspoken. And in medieval life, where emotional expression is limited, these small signals become everything, because they are the only space where personal feeling is allowed to quietly exist, not openly, not freely, but just enough to be felt. As evening approaches, the village settles again into its familiar calm. The sky softens. The air cools. Light fades slowly from the edges of the world, and you realize something important in this time and place. Relationships are not built in dramatic turning points, they are built in these small, almost invisible connections, moment by moment, until one day they are no longer small at all. There is a quiet truth in medieval relationships, one that does not reveal itself immediately, at first glance. Everything appears stable, people live together, they share space, they share responsibility, but emotional closeness, that deeper sense of being understood, is not always present, and often it is not expected. You begin this chapter in the soft light of early morning. The village is already awake, moving through its familiar rhythm. Smoke rises from chimneys. Water is carried. Bread is prepared. Life continues as it always has, but inside the homes. Something more subtle exists, a distance, not conflict, not separation, but emotional space. You step inside a modest house where a married couple sits quietly. They are not arguing. There is no tension in their movements. They simply exist in the same room, sharing the same daily reality. One prepares small tasks near the fire, the other sits nearby, focused on routine work. They speak occasionally, short sentences, practical words, necessary communication, and then silence returns, not uncomfortable, just familiar, because in medieval life, emotional expression is not the foundation of marriage, function is, survival is. Shared responsibility is, and so, many relationships develop a rhythm that does not rely on constant emotional connection. Instead, it relies on consistency, on presence, on doing what must be done. You walk outside again, where the village stretches quietly under a pale sky. A young couple passes you on the path. They are walking together, but not close in the way modern expectations might suggest. There is space between them, not physical distance out of conflict, but emotional restraint shaped by habit and upbringing. They speak briefly about daily tasks. Nothing personal, nothing deeply revealing, and yet they remain together, because being together does not require constant emotional sharing here. It requires alignment of life. As you continue observing, you begin to notice how people adjust to this emotional structure. Over time, many stop expecting deep verbal connection. They learn to interpret smaller signals instead, a shared glance that lasts a second longer, a nod instead of a long explanation, a silence that carries meaning only because it is repeated. These become the language of relationships, not words, but patterns. You pause near a small home where a married woman sits alone for a moment. Her expression is calm, thoughtful. She looks toward the doorway where her partner has just left for work. There is no visible sadness, but there is distance, not absence, but separation within presence. It is a strange balance, to live with someone, yet not always feel emotionally close to them, and yet. For many here, this is normal, not questioned, not challenged, simply accepted as the structure of life, because emotional expression, in this world, is not encouraged to dominate daily existence. It is secondary, sometimes even unnecessary, but still. It exists, just beneath the surface, in moments when routine softens, when exhaustion fades into stillness, when the world becomes quiet enough for thought to rise. A husband and wife sit together later in the day, sharing a simple meal. They eat in silence for a while. The room is dim, lit by soft candlelight. Then a brief exchange happens, a small comment, a short reply, and for a moment there is something like understanding. Not deep conversation, not emotional revelation, but acknowledgement that the other person is there, living the same life, carrying similar burdens, and sometimes that is enough. As evening approaches, you begin to see this pattern repeated across the village. Not all relationships lack emotion, but many express it differently, quietly, indirectly, through routine rather than words, through presence rather than expression. And as the sky darkens, you realize something subtle but important. Emotional distance here is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is simply another way of existing together, not separate, but not fully merged either, a balance shaped by time, culture, and necessity. And as night settles over the village once more, you begin to understand that closeness, in this world, is not measured by how much is said, but by how long two lives continue side by side, without breaking apart. There is a kind of pressure in medieval life that does not announce itself loudly. It does not arrive with force. It does not need to be shouted. Instead, it exists everywhere, in silence, in expectation, in the simple awareness of what is considered acceptable. You begin this chapter in the early morning mist, where the village is still half awake. The air is cool, heavy with dew, and the first light of day barely touches the rooftops. Everything feels calm, but beneath that calm, there is structure, a structure that shapes decisions long before they are made. You notice a young figure standing outside a home, listening as an older voice speaks from within. The tone is not harsh, not aggressive, but firm, certain. There is no debate, only instruction, and within that instruction, a path is being reinforced, because in medieval times, obedience is not always demanded through fear. Often, it is guided through expectation, through the understanding that resisting the flow of life brings consequences. Not always immediate, but always present. You walk further into the village and observe daily life unfolding. A young woman adjusts her clothing before stepping outside, her movements careful. She pauses briefly, as if checking something unseen, not because she is told to, but because she has learned that appearance, behavior, and conduct are always being noticed, always evaluated. Nearby, a young man listens to instructions from an elder. He nods quietly. There is no visible disagreement, not because he has none, but because disagreement here rarely changes anything. You begin to sense that obedience in this world is not just an action, it is a habit, formed slowly over years, reinforced by repetition. Children learn it early, not through punishment, but through observation. They watch how decisions are made, how elders speak, how futures are arranged, and over time, they understand, not everything is meant to be questioned, not every path is open for discussion. As the morning progresses, you notice a small interaction near a doorway. A young person hesitates before stepping inside. A brief pause. Almost invisible. Inside, voices are speaking about something important, a decision, a direction. The young figure takes a breath and enters. There is no resistance, only acceptance. but acceptance does not always mean agreement. Sometimes it simply means understanding that the choice is already gone. You continue walking, noticing how this quiet pressure exists in subtle ways. It is not always spoken aloud. It does not always feel heavy in the moment, but it shapes everything: who people speak to, how they behave, what they allow themselves to feel. A young couple passes by you on the path. They are speaking softly. Their conversation is calm but structured. There is a sense that even their words are filtered, carefully chosen, carefully delivered, not out of fear, but out of awareness that life here has boundaries, and stepping outside them carries uncertainty. You pause near a field where labor continues under the rising sun. Workers move in steady rhythm. No one rushes. No one questions the task. There is comfort in routine, but also confinement, because routine leaves little room for deviation, little room for personal direction. As the day moves forward, you begin to understand something important about this world. Obedience is not always enforced. It is often inherited, passed down through generations until it feels less like a rule and more like reality itself. And in that reality, choices feel smaller than they truly are. The afternoon light grows warmer. Shadows stretch across the ground. Life continues in its steady, predictable rhythm, but beneath that rhythm, lives move according to expectations that were set long before them. And as evening begins to approach, you notice something subtle again: a hesitation before speaking, a glance toward someone before answering, a pause before making even small decisions, not because people cannot choose, but because they have learned to consider what choosing might cost. And so, obedience remains, not as chains, but as quiet guidance, invisible, yet ever present. Shaping lives not through force, but through familiarity. And as the village settles into dusk once more, you begin to realize, sometimes the strongest control is the one that never feels like control at all. In medieval life, identity is often shaped before a person has the chance to understand it, not through personal discovery, but through expectation. And one of the strongest forces behind that expectation is gender. You begin this chapter in the soft light of late morning. The village is already fully awake, moving with practiced rhythm. Every person seems to know exactly where they belong and what is expected of them, but those expectations are not the same for everyone. They are divided quietly, clearly, and early. You notice a young boy walking beside an older man through the village. The boy's hands are empty now, but they will not remain so for long. He is being taught not just skills, but roles: how to work, how to provide, how to endure responsibility without hesitation. There is no long explanation, only demonstration, only repetition. Nearby, a young girl follows her mother, observing closely. Her lessons are different, but equally structured. She learns how to maintain a household, how to prepare food, how to manage daily tasks that will one day define her entire life, not as limitation, but as expectation. There is a quiet acceptance in both paths, not resistance, because from an early age, these roles are presented not as choices, but as reality. You walk through the village and begin to see how deeply this shapes everything. Boys and girls are not just growing up side by side, they are growing into different directions. Not separated by emotion, but by function. As the boy learns strength and endurance, the girl learns precision and care. Each path reinforcing what society already assumes they will become: a provider, a caretaker, a husband, a wife. These roles are not questioned often, because they are everywhere, in conversation, in training, in observation. A young man helps lift heavy materials near a workshop. His movements are steady, expected. Nearby, a young woman carefully arranges fabric and supplies, her attention focused, deliberate. Neither is free from responsibility, but the shape of that responsibility differs, and over time, It becomes internalized. You notice how even in small interactions, these expectations guide behavior. A boy is encouraged to remain composed, strong, controlled. A girl is encouraged to be attentive, patient, observant, not as rules spoken aloud every moment, but as patterns repeated so often they become instinct. As the day continues, you come across a moment that feels especially quiet. A young pair, still not yet fully defined by adulthood, passes each other on a narrow path. They do not stop, but they are aware, and in that awareness, there is something unspoken, because even before relationships fully form, gender expectations are already shaping how people approach each other, how they speak, how they hesitate, how they assume roles in connection. You begin to understand that in this world, relationships are not built between equals in the modern sense, they are built between roles that already carry meaning, and yet, within that structure, people still find ways to exist as individuals, small moments of personality, brief expressions of curiosity, quiet thoughts that do not always match expectation, but these moments remain contained. Because stepping outside the defined role is rare and often unnoticed. As afternoon light spreads across the village, life continues in its steady rhythm. A boy works under the guidance of an elder. A girl assists inside a home. Each movement reinforcing what they are becoming, not suddenly, but gradually, and perhaps that is what makes it so powerful. There is no single moment of transformation, only a slow alignment with what has always been expected. As the sun begins to lower, you notice how naturally people settle into their roles at the end of the day. There is no question of who does what. No confusion about place, everything fits, not because it was chosen, but because it was learned, and as evening approaches, you begin to see the deeper truth beneath it all. Gender here is not just identity, it is direction, a path laid out early, walked slowly, and followed almost without noticing, until one day, it simply becomes life. By now, the path has narrowed, not suddenly, not with force, but through years of quiet expectation, and what once felt like possibility now begins to feel like inevitability. You enter this chapter in the stillness of early evening. The village is calm, wrapped in warm fading light. Smoke rises gently from chimneys, and the sound of daily labor slows into quiet routines. Everything feels familiar, and yet something important is approaching: marriage, not as a romantic idea, not as a personal dream, but as duty. You begin to notice how conversations around you carry a different weight now. People speak less about if and more about when. There is no uncertainty in their tone. Only timing. A young couple stands near a home, speaking softly with an elder present. Their words are not emotional. They are practical, measured, finalizing details that will shape the next stage of their lives. There is no excitement in the way modern stories might imagine it, but there is acceptance, because by this point, the idea of choice has already faded into the background. You walk slowly through the village and observe how marriage is treated not as an event of personal fulfillment, but as a transition of responsibility, two lives preparing to merge into a shared structure of work, survival, and expectation, not because they were deeply chosen, but because they were deemed suitable. Nearby, you see a young woman sitting quietly inside her home. Her hands rest in her lap. Around her, preparations are taking place, simple, practical movements of arranging, folding, organizing. There is no celebration yet, only preparation, and in her expression, something subtle exists. Not fear, not joy, but awareness, the awareness that life is about to shift permanently. Across the village, a young man stands outside, watching the horizon. His posture is steady, but his thoughts feel distant. He knows what is coming, not as an unknown, but as a responsibility, a role he is expected to fulfill: provider, husband, participant in a system that has already been decided, and yet Neither of them resists, because resistance here does not change direction, it only delays acceptance. You notice how family members move around them, preparing the final steps. Everything is done with calm efficiency. No dramatic emotion. No loud ceremony yet, just quiet progression. As if life itself is moving them forward, there is a strange stillness in this stage, because once marriage becomes duty, the emotional uncertainty that once surrounded relationships begins to settle, not disappear, but compress into something controlled, something structured. You pause near a small gathering where older voices speak softly. They are not discussing love, they are discussing readiness. Has enough time passed? Are both prepared for their roles? Will the union maintain stability? These are the questions that matter, not compatibility of hearts, but compatibility of lives. As evening deepens, you return your attention to the young couple once more. They are no longer speaking. They are simply existing within the same understanding now. The agreement is not just between families anymore. It is becoming reality, a future that will soon be lived daily, and in that quiet moment, something subtle can be felt. Not romance, not longing, but a faint sense of finality, as if a door is slowly closing behind them, not with force, but with inevitability. The sky darkens. Lanterns begin to glow in small windows across the village. Life continues as always, but for them, something has already changed, because marriage, in this world, is not the beginning of love, it is the beginning of duty, and once it begins, there is no returning to what came before, only moving forward, into a life that has already been written in quiet agreement. Even in a world shaped by duty, by expectation, and by decisions made long before understanding, something unpredictable still exists. It does not appear often, and when it does, it rarely arrives in the way stories would expect. You begin this chapter in the quiet hours after sunset. The village is almost still now. Lantern light flickers gently from inside homes, casting warm, trembling shapes across wooden walls and narrow paths. Everything feels calm, but beneath that calm, something softer begins to emerge, not structure, not obligation, but something unplanned. You walk slowly through the village and notice a young couple sitting slightly apart from others. They are married now, or soon to be fully so, but something about them feels different from what you've seen before. There is still duty in their lives, still responsibility, but between them, there are moments where something else slips through, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. Like light through a narrow crack, a shared glance that does not end quickly, a pause that does not feel empty, a silence that feels understood. You begin to realize that love, in this world, does not often begin at the start of a relationship. Sometimes it grows later, after familiarity, after routine, after lives have already been placed side by side. You watch as the young woman adjusts something near a small fire. The young man sits nearby, not speaking at first. There is no urgency in their interaction. No pressure to fill silence, and yet the silence is no longer distant, it is shared. There is comfort here, not the kind born from passion or choice, but the kind formed through repeated presence, through knowing how someone moves, how they react, how they exist beside you in daily life, and over time. That knowledge begins to soften something inside. You notice a small moment. The man speaks something simple, about the day, about work, about nothing particularly meaningful. But she smiles, not because the words are important, but because the voice has become familiar, and familiarity, in this world, is where something fragile begins to form. You continue walking and see another pair in the distance. They are not the center of attention. No one is watching them closely, but they are sitting closer than before, not physically close in an obvious way, but emotionally less distant than what you've seen elsewhere. There is still restraint, still quiet behavior shaped by upbringing, but also something subtle breaking through it, a willingness to remain in the same space without tension. to exist together without silence feeling heavy, you begin to understand that true love here, when it appears, is not a sudden event. It is not chosen, it is not announced, it grows slowly. From repetition. From shared survival. From moments that, on their own, seem too small to matter, but together, they begin to change something, not everything, but enough. As night deepens, you notice how rare these moments are. Most relationships still remain defined by duty, by structure, by expectation, but in a few, something quietly shifts, a softness that was not planned, a connection that was not arranged, a feeling that neither system nor family fully intended, yet cannot completely prevent. You pause near a home where candlelight flickers inside. Through the window, you see a couple sitting near each other. They are not speaking much, but they are at ease, and that ease feels different. Not forced, not formal, just natural in a way that seems almost out of place in this world. You realize then that love, when it exists here, is not a foundation. It is a result of time, of shared space, of lives that continue side by side long enough for something real to quietly form, and because it is rare, it feels even more fragile, as if it could disappear just as easily as it appeared. The village settles deeper into night. The world grows quieter. Lanterns glow like small promises in the darkness, and somewhere within that silence, a connection that was never planned continues to grow, softly, unnoticed by most, but deeply real to those who feel it. There is a strange kind of quiet that settles in, after everything has already been decided, not dramatic, not emotional, just final. You find yourself now in the stage after marriage has begun to take shape. The decisions are no longer ahead of them, they are behind them, and what remains is life. You walk into a modest home in the village. The morning light filters softly through a small window, touching wooden surfaces worn by time and use. Everything is simple, functional, familiar. Inside, two people live together, not strangers anymore, but not entirely shaped by choice either. A married couple moves through their morning routine. One prepares something near the fire. The other gathers simple tools for the day. Their actions are coordinated, not because they planned them together in advance, but because repetition has slowly taught them how to exist side by side. There is no tension, but there is also no grand emotional connection, just shared space, shared time, shared responsibility. You begin to understand that living with someone you did not choose is not always about conflict or distance. Often, it is about adjustment, a quiet process where two separate lives slowly learn how to function as one unit, not through passion, not through choice, but through necessity. Outside, the village continues its steady rhythm. People greet each other briefly. Work begins as it always does. Life does not pause for personal transitions, it simply continues. You notice how the couple interacts in small ways. A question about the day. A simple response. A pause while passing by each other in a narrow space inside the home. Nothing significant on its own, but together. These moments form structure. A rhythm of coexistence. At times, there is silence between them that feels heavy to an outside observer. But for them, it is not always discomfort, sometimes it is just normal, a shared understanding that not everything needs to be spoken, not every moment needs to be filled. You observe a quiet moment later in the day. The woman sits near the window, her hands resting calmly in her lap. The man is outside, working nearby. They are not together in the same space, but they are connected through routine, through the knowledge that the other will return, that this pattern will continue tomorrow, and the day after that. You begin to see how this kind of life reshapes expectation itself. Before marriage, there may have been ideas of what closeness should feel like. or what connection might mean, but now those ideas are slowly replaced by something more grounded: presence, reliability, familiarity, and over time, these become their own form of bond, not as intense as imagined love stories, but more stable, less uncertain. As the afternoon light grows softer, you notice a small exchange inside the home. A simple question, a simple answer, followed by a brief pause where neither speaks, but neither leaves. They remain together in silence that no longer feels strange, it feels lived in, like an object worn smooth by use. You begin to realize that this is what life becomes when choice is removed from its beginning. Not emptiness, not tragedy, but adaptation, a slow reshaping of expectations until what once felt unfamiliar becomes ordinary, and sometimes even comforting. As evening approaches, the light outside turns warm and low. Shadows stretch across the village paths. Smoke rises gently into the fading sky. Inside the home, the couple sits quietly again. There is no need for conversation now. The day has already passed through its routine, and tomorrow will likely be the same, yet within that repetition, something subtle exists, not excitement, not longing, but a form of stability that only time can create, a life shared. Not because it was chosen, but because it continues, and in that continuation, a different kind of connection begins to take shape, quiet, steady, and real in its own understated way. After marriage, life does not suddenly transform. There is no clear beginning where everything feels different. Instead, it blends, slowly, quietly, into something continuous. You enter this chapter in the soft glow of early morning once again. The village is awake, as always. Smoke rises from chimneys. The sound of footsteps on dirt paths fills the air. Life continues in its steady rhythm, but now you are looking at something that has already settled: family life. Inside a modest home, you see a couple beginning their day not as individuals, but as a unit shaped by time and routine. Their movements are familiar now, not rehearsed, but learned through repetition. One prepares the fire. The other organizes simple household tasks. There is no discussion needed for every action. Over time, patterns have formed naturally, not perfect, but functional, and within that function, a household begins to exist. You begin to notice that family life in medieval times is not defined by emotional expression alone. It is defined by structure. Roles become clearer after marriage, not stricter in words, but more established in practice. One person focuses on providing resources, the other focuses on maintaining the home, and together they form a system that supports survival. You walk further through the village and observe similar households, each one slightly different in tone, but similar in foundation. Children begin to appear in this stage of life as well. Not always immediately, but eventually, as part of the natural progression of expectations, and when they do, the structure expands. Now the household is no longer just two lives, it becomes something larger, more complex, a small world of its own. Inside one home, you see a child sitting near the floor while the parents continue their tasks. There is calmness here, not chaos, not emotional intensity, just continuity. The child observes, learns, absorbs everything without needing instruction at every moment, because in medieval family life, learning often happens through presence rather than teaching. You notice how communication within the household is often brief. A request, a response, a confirmation, the kind of communication that keeps life moving forward without interruption. It is not empty, but efficient, and over time, it becomes natural. You pause outside another home where a family shares a quiet moment together. They are not speaking much. One child is being helped with a simple task. The parents move around calmly, guiding without unnecessary explanation. There is a sense of continuity here. A life being built not through dramatic moments, but through repetition, day after day, season after season. As you continue watching, you realize that family life in this world is less about emotional display and more about stability. It is not built on constant expression of feeling, but on the ability to maintain life itself. Food must be prepared, work must be done, children must be raised, and through all of this, relationships continue quietly in the background. You see moments of connection, but they are subtle. A brief smile between tasks. A shared pause in the evening. A moment where someone sits down beside the other without needing to say why. These moments are not rare, but they are understated, because in this world, importance is not always shown loudly, it is lived. As the afternoon moves forward, the village feels steady, almost unchanging. But within each home, life is constantly moving forward in small steps. A child grows slightly older, a task becomes easier through repetition, a shared routine becomes second nature, and without noticing it, time passes. You begin to understand that family life after marriage is not a destination, it is a process, one that does not pause, one that does not announce itself, it simply continues, and within that continuation, relationships are not constantly questioned. They are maintained, not through intensity, but through consistency. As evening arrives once more, the village settles into its familiar calm. Lights appear in windows. Smoke fades into the darkening sky. The rhythm slows, but never stops. Inside the homes, families gather quietly at the end of the day. There is no need for celebration or reflection, just presence, just shared time, and in that simple state of being together, life continues forward, not dramatically, but steadily, as it always has. There comes a point when life stops feeling like it is beginning, and starts feeling like it is simply continuing. No clear transitions, no dramatic changes, just days flowing into days, quietly, steadily. Without interruption, you find yourself once again in the village at dawn. The sky is pale, almost colorless, as if the world is still deciding how to begin. Smoke rises from chimneys in slow spirals. The sound of footsteps returns to the familiar paths. Everything is as it has always been, and yet something feels different when you look closer, because now you are not observing the beginning of relationships, but their reality. Inside a small home, a couple moves through their morning without speaking much. Not because there is distance, but because words are no longer required for every action. A shared rhythm has formed, not perfect, not idealized, but consistent. One prepares food, the other gathers tools for the day. A brief exchange happens, simple, functional, and then silence returns. It is not empty silence, it is lived silence, the kind that grows when two people have repeated the same patterns long enough that they no longer need to explain them. You begin to notice this everywhere now. Relationships here are not defined by emotional intensity, they are defined by stability, by continuation, by the ability to move through life together without constant disruption. You walk further through the village and see a young couple working side by side outside their home. There is no visible affection in the way modern stories might expect. But there is coordination, a quiet understanding of each other's presence, not spoken, but learned. Nearby, another household carries on in similar fashion. A child plays briefly in the background while adults continue their tasks. Life is not divided into emotional moments and practical moments, it is all one continuous flow, and within that flow, relationships exist not as focal points, but as structure. You begin to realize that the quiet reality of these relationships is not that they lack meaning, it is that their meaning is not always expressed, it is embedded, in repetition, in routine, in shared time. A small moment catches your attention. A couple sitting outside their home in the late morning light. They are not speaking much. One adjusts something nearby. The other simply watches for a moment. Then looks away. No words are exchanged, but nothing feels broken, because here, silence is not always absence. Sometimes it is simply the default state of life shared for too long to require explanation. As the day continues, you notice how expectations have softened into behavior. What once may have felt new or uncertain has now become familiar, almost automatic, not because emotions disappeared, but because they settled. You observe how people no longer question every interaction. They no longer search for meaning in every glance or pause. Instead, they live inside it. The reality of relationships here is not built on constant emotional discovery. It is built on endurance, on presence over time, on the quiet agreement to continue forward together. Even when nothing dramatic is happening, as afternoon light spreads across the village, everything feels steady. Not exciting, not intense, just stable, and in that stability, something subtle exists, a kind of comfort that does not demand attention, a kind of connection that does not need to be spoken to be real. As evening approaches once more, the village slows into its familiar rhythm. Homes glow softly with candlelight. Shadows stretch across the paths like long memories of the day. Inside the homes, couples sit together without urgency. There is no need to fill every moment with conversation, because the reality of their relationship is already understood, not through words, but through time. And as night settles in, you begin to understand something quietly important. Relationships here are not defined by how strongly they are felt in each moment, but by how steadily they continue across many. There is a question that lingers beneath everything, even when life appears calm on the surface. What do people truly feel? Not what they're expected to feel, not what their roles suggest, but what exists quietly underneath all of it. You find yourself once again in the village at dusk. The light is soft, fading slowly into deep blue shadows. Homes begin to glow with small pockets of candlelight. The day is ending. But life is still gently moving forward, inside these homes. People sit in stillness, and within that stillness, feelings exist, but they are not always visible. You enter a modest home where a couple sits near the hearth. The fire burns softly, casting warm light across the room. They are close enough to share the space, but not always close in expression. There is silence for a while, not uncomfortable, but layered, because beneath that silence, there are thoughts that are never fully spoken. You begin to understand something important here. People in medieval times do feel deeply, but they do not always express those feelings in ways that are obvious. Emotion is not absent, it is contained. A young woman adjusts something near the fire, her movement slow and familiar. The man beside her watches briefly, then looks away. There is no conversation at first, but that does not mean nothing is happening. Inside, thoughts continue, reflections, memories, small observations that never become words. You realize that what people truly feel often remains hidden beneath routine, because life leaves little space for constant emotional expression. Work, survival, responsibility, these fill most of the day, and so feelings adapt. They become quieter, more internal. You walk through the village and notice how different households carry different emotional tones. Some feel warmer. Some feel more distant. Some feel balanced in ways that are hard to define, but none of them are empty. Even relationships that appear restrained contain something underneath. The history of shared days, a memory of how things began, a sense of familiarity that cannot be erased easily. You pause near a small window where you see a couple sitting opposite each other. They are not speaking much, but every now and then, there is a brief exchange of glance or gesture. Small, almost invisible, but real, and within those small moments, something human persists. You begin to see that what people truly felt here is not always dramatic. it is often subtle, a quiet acceptance of life as it is, a faint longing for something different that is never fully pursued, a comfort in routine that slowly replaces uncertainty, and sometimes even gratitude, not loud, not expressed, but present in the way people continue forward without resistance. As evening deepens, the village becomes softer, quieter. Candlelight flickers in windows like small thoughts glowing in the dark. Smoke drifts gently upward into the night sky. Inside the homes, people sit together again. Not because they are always emotionally connected in every moment, but because they share the same life, and that shared life carries its own meaning. You realize that true feeling here is not measured in words or expressions, it is measured in continuity, in staying, in remaining, in continuing through days that do not always change, but still move forward, and perhaps that is what people truly felt most often, not overwhelming emotion, not constant expression, but something quieter, something that lives beneath everything else, and only reveals itself in silence. And now we arrive at the end, not of a story with a sharp conclusion, but of a long, quiet journey through a world that feels both distant and strangely familiar. You stand once more at the edge of the village, though it no longer feels like a single place. It feels like a memory now. A collection of lives. Moments. Decisions made long before they were understood. The night is still, not empty, but complete. Every window in the village glows softly now, like small enclosed worlds of their own. Inside each one, life continues. Not dramatically, not loudly, but steadily. As it always has, and you begin to realize something important: nothing in this world ever truly stopped. It simply changed form. You think back to everything you've seen, relationships shaped before choice, love that arrived late. Or quietly. Or sometimes not at all, lives guided by duty, expectation, class, and time itself, and yet, within all of it, people still lived, they still felt, still adapted, still continued forward, not perfectly, but humanly. You notice a final image forming in your mind of a couple sitting quietly inside a home. No grand moment. No declaration. Just presence. Shared time. A life unfolding in silence. And somehow, that feels like the truest conclusion of everything, because in medieval times, love was not always the beginning, and it was not always the end. Sometimes it was something that appeared quietly in between, or something that never fully appeared at all, but life continued regardless. And perhaps that is the most important truth of all, that even without choice as we understand it today, people still built lives, still formed bonds, still moved forward into tomorrow. The village grows darker now. The lanterns dim slightly as the night deepens. The wind moves gently across empty paths, and everything begins to settle, not into silence, but into rest. You take one last look at this world, this slow, structured, quietly emotional world, and it begins to fade. Like a story drifting away at the edge of sleep, and as it fades, there is only stillness left, soft, calm, endless in its quiet way. Thank you for walking through this world, for listening to these quiet lives, and for staying until the very end. Now, as everything grows still, let the night carry you gently forward, and rest. Good night. Crescent moon.